Hello and welcome to my channel. The subject of this video is a Vedic astrological analysis of the 2015 refugee crisis, the Islamic colonization of Western Europe. This will be done using very basic tools of Vedic astrology. The time used for the event is September 7th, 2015 at 1200 hours in Berlin, Germany. This is specifically the Merkel announcement. Introduction. The 2015 refugee crisis is one of the pivotal events of human history. This is because it represents the end of not only the cycle of civilization as it has existed in Western Europe since the Renaissance, but potentially of Western hegemony in general. Thus, it stands as the coda to the Battle of Gaugamela fought by Alexander the Great, which defeated the Persian Empire and set the West on the course of its historic mission. An astrological analysis of this event will serve to understand the inner dynamics of occult forces and the waves of probability they generate in the material world. The matrix which they form, that is expressed as the chart, offers a unique and deep insight into events, their causes, and the potential manner in which the seeds of the announcement by the German Chancellor may unfold through history. The trigger of this event was, of course, the announcement by German Chancellor Angela Merkel, which issued an open invitation to the Syrians to seek refugee status in Germany, though this was obviously more broadly applied. It is true that the crisis had been building before the point, as illegal immigration was increasing into Europe from the spring of 2015. However, it was the Merkel announcement which formally opened the floodgates and created the crisis as it is currently unfolding at this point in May of 2016. The exact time of the Merkel announcement is unclear. In researching this, it was evident that this was made during a meeting of the German parliament on September 7th. Most of this meeting lasted from 1100 to 13 hours Berlin time and was thus under the sign of Libra, so it is likely that that is the ascendant. I have chosen to pick the time in the middle of this meeting as the most logical approximation. A difference of an hour one way or another would have minimal effects outside at most 1 degree in some of the fast-moving planets, and it would not affect the nakshatra placements. Now, one of the first things to look at is the dominant patterns in the chart. There are several which are repeated through a variety of placements within the chart. And so those patterns are what we would expect would have the strongest impetus towards manifestation. We will be seeing these as we go through the chart. I will just read through what some of them are, skipping all of the details at this point. The most dominant pattern is false idealism and false views. This is followed by clouded reason. Next, violence and economic loss, revolution and strife, and after this, hidden government agenda. Next, we will have a brief overview of the nodal placements of the chart. The north node of Rahu is in Virgo, the 12th house, and the south node of the moon, Ketu, is in Pisces, which is the 6th house in this chart. The axis of the north and south nodes of the moon represent the praxis of the chart. This is the dominant force driving events. In analyzing the structure from the vantage point of the Libra ascendant, this is a problematic placement. The reason is that the axis lay between two houses which are considered challenging, the houses of obstacles and the house of loss. Further, the lords of these two houses are poorly placed or conjunct, which means that the inflections of the house will most probably be giving difficult results, though transits play a role as to how this will unfold and to what degree. In general, the probability is this placement will generate stress in key areas, health and enemies, as well as expenditures, and also disturbance of the public order. Economic loss and disturbances are also seen, of course, in other areas of the chart. The stronger a pattern is, as I mentioned, the more prominent will be its appearance. Another generic result of this placement is an obsession to flee from entanglements with an unwanted past history and escape into a new and regenerating ideal. It is particularly a political ghost which haunts the government in this chart. This notion is strongly present in a variety of areas. A core element of this obsession is foreigners and an alien belief system. It is clearly a powerful drive. But trying to escape the past here is only running into it in some form, as enforced niceness is in the wings, as we shall see. One potential reason for this might be that this moral ideal, which could be characterized as healing, renewal, or rebirth, while accepted by a large segment of the population, especially women and the youth, is in reality a form of propaganda. It's smoke from Rahu, the north node, through governments and large corporations to conceal a more covert agenda. At least some proportion of the executives of these institutions are aware of this fact, and some may be illicitly profiting from their actions in scandalous ways. So we'll now proceed with a study of the chart. So the ascendant is Libra, and the ruler of this is Venus, who is malefic in this chart. The ascendant nakshatra is Vishakah. Analysis. The ascendant lord, Venus. The first point to analyze in any chart is the status of the ascendant lord. He is the dominant influence in the chart. In this chart, Venus is malefic. While not weak at 20 degrees, Lord Shukra is in the sign of his enemy, the moon, which is Cancer. He is also receiving a negative aspect from Ketu, which is conjunct the malefic Uranus in the sign of Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is Combust in this chart. The dominant effect of a malefic Venus is that it inhibits the ability to make decisions which are for the best over the long term. Because Venus rules over areas such as relationships, diplomacy, transportation, lifestyles, arts, and females, these will all be adversely affected. This can also generate a focus on triviality. Ascendant lunar nakshatra, or lunar mansion, Vishakah. This asterism is called the Star of Purpose. One of the symbols of this lunar mansion is the potter's wheel. This represents the whirling activity bringing about creation from the energy of this nakshatra. It is all about transformation. When specifically on the ascendant, the native can be religious or politically inclined, prone to anger and impatient. It is ruled by Jupiter, who is, as mentioned, combust in this chart. This means that the shadow side of the lunar mansion, which is suppressed anger, bitterness, and revolutionary impulses, will manifest. House. The first house, or the ascendant, is the primary indicator of the individual and maps the course of the life. The natural tendencies, health, and vigor can be seen from this house. It also represents public persona. Sign. Libra is generally about balancing and resolving opposites. There is a focus on harmony. This sign has an emphasis on diplomacy and flexibility. It can be ambivalent, manipulative, and avoiding responsibility at times. Vacillating, a Libra ascendant will have a tendency to want to say yes to everyone. Aspects. Mars' first aspect is looking at this house. Mars is considered a detrimental influence in Libra, as here he can make one indecisive and prone to suppress stronger emotions. While these people are peacemakers who value cooperation, outside of supportive relationships, they will vacillate and avoid making hard decisions. This is especially true if those decisions may lead to conflict. Libra is the ascendant in this malefic situation with the Lord of the house, Venus, can make one overly focused on triviality and appearance, in short, vanity. This impetus to shallowness and conformity to what is fashionable, not only in dress but opinions, as well as superficial kindness, may combine with the Libran aversion to conflict to create a situation where that which is at odds with the nostrums of fashion, be they dress or accepted views or politically correct views, may be shut down. This would be a social trend towards enforced niceness. This would be the public persona represented by European and, more specifically in this chart, German culture. While the crisis is Western European, the chart seems to be centered more on Germany specifically. Pardon me. Second house, Scorpio. Saturn is placed in Scorpio. The ruler is Mars, whose status is mixed to bad. He is negatively conjunct in a negative nakshatra and poorly aspected. Analysis. The second house governs matters of money and security. This is the house of profits, gains, and resources as well. It is also considered a death-inflicting house. Sign. Here in Scorpio is a focus on the unknown. It is about obtaining through seduction or investigation. This is the sign of a deep level of feeling and a desire to repair broken people and situations. Scorpio is also associated with devoted friendship. It can be a critical, hypersensitive, and become victimized in relationships. Planet, Saturn. Saturn in Scorpio is in the house of his enemy, Mars, and is thus more malefic than usual. Saturn here can bring about painful emotional situations. This may be especially in conjunction with others reflected in social disruptions. There is also a drive for power and a vindictiveness which can manifest covertly in this placement. He can also generate an intense interest in the darker side of life and self-destructive tendencies. Saturn in the second house, negatively placed, can create restrictions on speech and unhealthy habits. These restrictions on expression may relate to his investigative nature and Scorpio in his unearthing of what is hidden. Once out, there may be a desire to suppress this information with the enforced niceness that we found in Libra. It is also potentially will manifest situations which are economically draining. The natural conservatism of Saturn in this placement can turn negative with a resistance to adapt to new situations. Saturn in Anuradha NAKSHATRA, which he rules, is at the head of the Scorpion. In this location, he will seek to succeed and accomplish his goals above all else. He may not do this in a confrontational manner, as Scorpio is often about what is hidden. Thus, this placement is one which indicates there are secret agendas active within the chart. But he will work on this aim concealed within coalitions. This is a placement which can also create scandals. The nature of these potential scandals can be seen through Saturn's aspects as we move through the chart. Aspects. Saturn is receiving a negative aspect from Ketu looking at this location, though with 75% of his power as an aspect. Ketu is linking these effects of Saturn in Scorpio with the past. Because Scorpio represents what is hidden, these are historical forces and events which are kept buried. The role of Ketu as co-ruler of Scorpio. Ketu is considered the co-ruler of Scorpio, and planets here are thought to reflect the influence of events from the past. Thus, his aspect, while reduced, is still amplified on this house. Saturn is working with Ketu in bringing the results of these past events into manifestation now through their placements and aspects. Rulerships. Ruler of the fourth and the second. Because of the malefic influences, the shadow side of this placement will predominate. This can manifest as spending too much on material items as well as difficulties with real estate. Ruler of the fifth in the second. Potential results of this placement in this chart are complications with governments and large corporations, losses through speculation, and diminishment of resources for children or future generations. Because Saturn rules the elderly, poor, and outcast, they too will suffer from this austerity generated by the situation. Third house, Sagittarius with Pluto. And Pluto is in the nakshatra of Purva Ashadha, which is ruled by Venus, who is malefic. There is also the aspect of the moon and Jupiter. Analysis. House. This is the house reflecting the intellect and disposition. Relationships with siblings and neighbors are also found here. The status of this house indicates the ability to achieve goals. Short travels and communications can also be indicated. Because this is the house of siblings and neighbors, in this context of this chart, it may represent the European Union overall, though as a governmental structure, this might also be associated with the sun in this chart. Sign. There is a focus on justice in this sign, as well as fairness and freedom. This can be idealistic and humanitarian. On the flip side, this can be self-righteous or manifest in ways such as a religious fanatic or people who have highly rigid views. Planet. It is said that those born with Pluto in Sagittarius have an impetus towards discovery and openness to new experiences. Being Sagittarius, this would be mainly an inclusion of different worldviews and religions. This is a highly nonconformist placement. However, as the lord of this house, Jupiter, is combust, it is going to emphasize the more negative side of this sign and planets here. This can be reflected in an impetus of Pluto here to cover mistakes and provide highly erudite and metaphysical arguments to show that there were no mistakes at all. Another reflection of this here might be that one is so open-minded that their brains fall out. This is a placement which is generally considered difficult for the early years of the querent, which in this case is interpreted as the early history of the colonization. In the third house, this can create the sense that the native speech is not being heard and his communications blocked. And we have seen already the Libran enforced niceness as well as restrictions on speech from Saturn. As a result of this being the third house, he will focus on intelligence and try to develop strong opinions which are highly intellectual to counter this repression. This may lead to forceful or manipulative speech reflective of Plutonian ideologies, and I will just leave that at that. This desire to impose views onto others is reflected elsewhere in the chart as well. The moon, which is representing the mentality, is oriented towards idealism, and if it cannot attain this in the lunar mansion in which it sits, he will create an impetus to take harsh measures to force the ideal. To this moon, the fiction trumps the reality, and Pluto is echoing this drive. This would be seen, for example, in censorship. The nakshatra in which Pluto is sitting is Purva Ashadha, ruled by Venus. Venus is malefic, and thus will radiate the more negative aspects of this asterism. Especially with the malefic Venus, this may manifest as a fickle emotional attitude. One day, if it's trending on Facebook, there will be great enthusiasm for a subject or people, but this can turn cold very quickly. Aspects. This house and Pluto are receiving the full aspects of the moon and Jupiter. The negative influence of Jupiter here may create an overvaluation of the matters of this house and sign. He can overexpand this desire for openness and cast it in an illusionary light or religious zeal when it's really negative. False images of the noble savage are an example of such an influence. The moon will bring these matters directly into the popular mentality and may emanate his desire from his placement to act as a parent or teacher to those who are removed from what is familiar. This false image motif in the public mentality could also be read about skepticism about the EU as one's neighbors and siblings as well, since this is the house and placement which may represent that. So there are other aspects to it. Fourth house. Capricorn. Pardon me. Ruler, Saturn. Status, Malefic. In an enemy sign. Aspects, Saturn's first aspect, 100%. The full aspect of Venus, Mars' second aspect of 25%, and Rahu's first aspect at 100%. Analysis. House. This is the mother and the native place. It can also reflect ancestral property as well as private affairs. In this chart, this may be representing Europe in general, but most probably it is Germany itself, since this is the central locus of the chart is Berlin. There are also other indications here culturally that this may be the Germans. Sign. The focus of this sign is on security and practicality. There can be an emphasis on organization, Ordnung, and tradition. This can be a place to deal out harsh justice and a gloomy disposition, especially if you're thinking with the blood. Capricorn is an earth sign and pragmatic. It also represents the order and discipline, big surprise, that were more traditionally associated with German culture, at least in the past. Capricorn here is the midnight of the chart, and the location cast in the most shadow. This is indicative that this is a neglected space. Aspects. This house and what it represents in the chart is heavily aspected with many planets looking at it. It will receive the full aspects of Saturn and Rahu, the full aspect of Venus, and 25% of Mars, and these are all malefic. Especially whenever there are multiple aspects, they may not all manifest at exactly the same time, but some will become more dominant based on transits, while always active on some level. In this case, the homeland is going to be the subject of a variety of negative trends. This may be influences from Saturn affecting areas of security and economic loss, as well as bringing up painful issues, especially ones which may relate to the past. The Venus and Mars conjunction looking here will bring strife and damage to real estate. Because they are in the 10th house of profession, this may also suggest economic disruptions. Rahu in the 12th house will bring the influences of foreigners and bring about separation and segregation, which affects the geographical homeland. These events surrounding the loss and separation affecting the homeland by Rahu or foreigners will be at its apex during the major planetary cycle of Rahu. 5th house, Aquarius. Neptune is placed here. The ruler of this house is Saturn, who is malefic in an enemy sign. It's receiving Mars' third aspect at 100%, as well as aspect of the Sun. Neptune is sitting in Shatabisha NAKSHATRA, which is ruled by Rahu and is malefic. Analysis. House. This is the house of progeny of all types, romance, and competition. Another aspect of this house is a religious mindedness, spiritual practices. It can also represent that which is unconventional and oftentimes society or large social groups. Sign, or excuse me, I stand corrected. Those reflect the sign, not the house. sign. This is all about believing the ideal and focusing on innovation. There can be a studious and scientific bent to this sign. There is also a focus on the community, but sometimes on the eccentric and the unconventional. Planet, Neptune. Neptune in the fifth house brings the obscure and misty nature of this planet into the house of progeny. This may refer to children or a younger generation, which are dreamers and not in touch with reality. This will also create a number of secrets around areas of sexuality, and that may be specifically sexuality related to children. One negative side of this is that the native will fall in love with the wrong people. They will want to work to save the victim and be hailed as the hero. But this is a distortion of Neptune's fog. One factor which is heightening this aspect of Neptune is that he is sitting in the lunar mansion or nakshatra ruled by Rahu. Thus, influences of the shadow planet are falling upon him and also creating toxic illusions. This will manifest as false idealism, irrational behavior, but it could also be reflective of deceit and trickery. Aspects. The full aspect of Mars looking at this house may generate deviant activities related to its matters. There is also the possibility of violence. The aspect of the Sun may mean that this will happen under the auspices of authority figures such as governments or large corporations. Under the Sun's aspect on Neptune, coming from the political sign of Leo, can also indicate strife between the population and the government, especially around fifth house matters. The role of Rahu as co-ruler of Aquarius. As co-ruler of Aquarius, Rahu is bringing into play his influence into this house beyond just through the nakshatra. This means that the matters of this house as they unfold should be understood as the actions of past history coming to fruit in this chart in this specific manner. Saturn's placement in Scorpio, where he is digging out painful issues, undoubtedly plays a role in this process, because this is his sign. Because the Sun is aspecting this house, this may indicate that these are in connections with the past government. Mars may be related to past conflicts, industrial policies, or both. Aquarius as the fifth house represents unconventional romance and creative interest, as well as a focus on technology. It may also represent an unusual attitude or treatment of children. Because the ruler of this house, Saturn, is poorly placed, this will manifest in a negative manner, and this will be amplified by the aspects on this house. Saturn, whose role is to show us reality at its most raw, will be drawing out the matters of this house in such a dark manner. Under the aspects of Mars, unusual or deviant relations and treatment of children may be violent, such as forms of rape. I also have a suspicion that these influences may be indicative of false flag activities, since the Sun and the government is here, towards younger people. Pardon me. There. The sixth house, Pisces. Ketu and Uranus are conjunct in this house. The ruler is Jupiter, who is Combust. It is receiving an aspect from Mercury. Ketu is in Uttara Nakshatra, which is ruled by Saturn, and Uranus is in Refugee Nakshatra, which is ruled by Mercury. Analysis. This is the house of enemies and diseases. Mental anguish is also seen from this house. Pardon me. Sign. These are the deep waters of the zodiac. It is also the sign of contrasting forces. There can be a metaphysical bent to this sign and a desire to create a more heavenly environment, but it can also be naive, weak, defenseless, or impractical. Pardon me. It is here one sees faith, hope, and sentimentalism. Planets. The conjunction of Ketu and Uranus. In this conjunction, Ketu is holding the lower degree and is dominant, fortunately, because the other way is highly inauspicious. However, as the planets are 18 degrees apart, this is a very weak conjunction. It is still, however, inauspicious. Uranus is disruptive of Ketu's function to create separation. This can cause erratic shifts and unpredictable effects from Ketu through his aspects. Ketu can at times manifest anarchistic traits, and Uranus may heighten these. Ketu. The sign of Pisces has strong overtones of spirituality, intuition, and inspiration. Ketu would seem to be well placed here, but will often bring separation in regard to these matters in the chart. He can often actively block intuition in an effort to push the focus more towards Rahu, who is in the sign of practicality and calculative logic, which is Virgo. Thus, with this placement, it is much more important to rely on pragmatic, empirical logic than intuition and feelings. I hope the Europeans got that. A feel-good approach will be detrimental. This is especially true regarding matters of this house, which are enemies and diseases. Ketu in the sixth house will bring a variety of conflicts and ambiguity. Much of it will have historical roots. He will bring into the environment also exotic diseases which have not been there before, or sometimes ones which were there historically. He can also create unexpected deaths and losses, as well as a sense of mental instability here. Ketu in this placement in individuals' charts can sometimes represent activities such as a social worker who is seeking to care for the underprivileged. However, because the ruler of this house is Jupiter is Combust, this can again generate overly idealistic, overly optimistic projections onto the underprivileged. It can also create a very rigid moralizing regarding them. In the iconography of Ketu, he is a body without a head. This means that he does not think about the issues of the house and sign in which he is placed, but he reacts to them more instinctively. In this house, this means that Ketu is not thinking about the enemies represented by the house or the subjects of diseases, and he is reacting according to the emotional nature of Pisces, with, of course, Uranus there creating a chaotic influence that's making it more chaotic, but we'll get to that in a moment. The south node of the moon is in the lunar mansion of Uttarabhadrapada. This is ruled by Saturn, who is poorly placed in this chart. This indicates the completion of a past cycle. This is also the lunar mansion whose energy is focused on breaking paradigms. So what does that mean here? That means this is the end. This is the end of a cycle. This is the end of a cycle of history. And whatever comes next, that we will see. But the past is done. Uranus. Uranus bubbling in the deep waters of Pisces can stir up hidden and disruptive phenomena, especially those which are deeply repressed or are concealed from public awareness and view. I think one manifestation of that could be terrorist plots. Another effect is to create a desire to escape from reality. Cult, antisocial, or revolutionary leaders can be the people who are emerging from these waters. In the sixth house, he amplifies many of Ketu's effects. The planet itself is considered uncomfortable in this placement. Uranus may bring unexpected problems regarding the body, which in this context would refer to the physical landscape. Uranus is sitting in the lunar mansion of Refugee. Here he may create a wide awareness of issues and revolutionary impulses. We've seen that pattern with Vishakah as well. Mercury rules this nakshatra, and as he is poorly conjunct with Rahu, his negativity is emanating through this lunar mansion. In this chart, Uranus is the planet which is holding the highest degree and is thus considered the sole significator of the chart matrix. The deep impetus of this chart is disruption and revolution, and as he is in the sixth house, this will come from diseases and enemies. This is reinforced by the nakshatra placements of both Ketu and Uranus in the chart. And one final point, Refugee is the last nakshatra. That again is indicative of an end of a cycle. Things are entering into a new turn, whatever that may be. Aspects. Mercury's full aspect is looking at this house. Well, he only has one, so it's going to be full. The little prince is debilitated in Pisces, as is his aspect. Even without the toxic influence of Rahu, this would create miscommunication and miscalculation. This, combined with his negative absorptions of Rahu's traits, can create a very inauspicious aspect on this house sign and these two planets. An attempt to resolve the sixth house issues of enemies and diseases with a Ketu-based intuitive approach under the aspect of Mercury clouding reason and Uranus creating disruption behind the scenes will probably not yield positive results. Also, that which had worked in the past no longer will. Seventh house, Aries. Ruler Mars. Status mixed to bad, negatively conjunct, debilitated in a nakshatra, and aspected. Aspects. Jupiter's second aspect. Analysis. House. This is the house of marriage and all types of partnerships and relationships. Legal bonds are also seen from here. It can also be success and reputations in foreign lands. It also indicates danger in life. Sign. Getting things done and focus on oneself. This can be a self-assertive in an adversarial or an enterprising way. That all depends. This is the sign of leadership. Aries as the seventh house can represent the dilemmas of life, and especially in relationships when it is critical to delineate between interdependency in a positive manner and codependency in a negative way. Because of the nature of the sign to push things forward, these types of situations will be prominent in public awareness. The status of Mars may also indicate that they will be characterized by violence, particularly towards real estate involving fire or with bullying activity. Remember, a debilitated or even partially debilitated Mars is frustrated. And so he does not pick fights based on what is right to defend that which is good, moral, like a code of chivalry, but instead he does it in order to prove himself or for petty reasons. Another factor to consider is that in a Libra ascendant, there can be a desire to seek a partner who is more dominant in the relationship and will take charge of the native, or that which is represented by Libra, the first house, which is here the European, specifically German public persona. Translated into the nature of this chart, what this means is that one side of the relationship between the natives and the colonist is going to assume an explicitly dominant role, and it won't be the native Europeans. The Combust influence of Jupiter may cause them to believe that this is morally justified, because Mars, who rules this house, is with Venus, and implies that women under the influence of this chart actually desire such a treatment, and this is reinforced by the dangerous attraction aspect of the Mars and Venus conjunction that we will see in a few moments. So, in short, much of these is what women in Europe want, whether they want to admit it or not. Eighth house, Taurus. Ruler, Venus, who is malefic. Aspects, Saturn, Rahu, and Jupiter. House. This is the house of accidents and death. It is also associated with sudden changes. Misfortune, misery, and disappointments are seen from this house. It also can show indications of robbery. Longevity is also under the influence of this house. Sign. This is a sign of keeping matters stable and a more conservative bent. There can also be a sense of possessiveness. This sign can be very productive and earthy. It can also reflect a more materialistic bent. Aspects. This house is receiving three negative aspects: the full gaze of Saturn from his second aspect, and a similar strength from the Combust Jupiter's third aspect, as well as a 75% influence from Rahu. Because of his placement, Saturn may be forcing a confrontation with negative issues of this house by exposing them to the public. This may also have historical roots related to what is hidden. Ironically, Jupiter and Rahu may be mixing to create a similar influence. This is an illusionary over-optimism. There is a Pollyanna attitude towards the matters of this house. This is reinforced by the state of the Lord of the house, Venus, who is malefic and thus inhibiting proper judgment. Rahu additionally brings from his placement in the 12th house the influence of foreigners onto these matters. The Combust Jupiter will provide rationalizations to explain away 8th house matters such as death and accidents, to preserve his overexpansive optimism, such as, if we're nice to them, they won't hurt us. He may also simply bring bad luck in other transits. As this placement is this is the house of those who would sell their souls for sexual pleasure and material comforts. Because this is the house of accidents and death, this may indicate sexual wounding or potentially white slavery. The foreigners, because of the 12th house aspect, may have a role in this. Although Mercury is conjoined with Rahu there, so this could also indicate organized crime. Beyond the sexual, this house also applies to finances. Not only will there be the possibility for sudden reversals of financial fortunes stemming from the events of this crisis, but there is very likely financial malfeasance from which hidden parties are benefiting. This would include the matters of this house, such as white slavery involving both women and children. Saturn looking at this may reveal such scandals, if they do exist, about government and corporate figures. Ninth house, Gemini. The moon is placed here. The ruler of the house is Mercury. His status is that he is exalted but negatively conjunct. The moon is in Anuradha, NAKSHATRA, the third pada specifically, which is ruled by Rahu. Analysis. This is the house of both fate and fortune. There is also an association with wisdom and learning, especially higher forms of education. This represents the philosophical bent. Longer journeys may also be indicated here. Sign. Making distinctions and communications are the subject of this sign. This is a sign of thinking, but it is also a sign of duality. There are further associations with games in this sign. The thinking and mentality may tend to be of a more practical nature. Planet, the moon. Now, the moon itself represents the mind and the mentality. In this chart, this represents the general mentality of the public. And the ninth house can be a more philosophical and idealistic. It may also bring upset with the father or perhaps authority figures or the fatherland, here creating inconsistency with beliefs. Another potential problem the moon can create in this placement is issues with traveling, especially longer journeys. The moon in Gemini is placed in a sign that is ruled by Mercury, who is poorly conjunct with Rahu, and thus will bring out the more negative sides of the planet in this placement. This can create a mentality that is restless and overly intellectual, though two-faced and inconsistent, involved in rather surface arguments will predominate in this mentality. It is also one that will engage in manipulative games. The moon is sitting in the lunar asterism or nakshatra of Ardha, specifically the third pada. Here, there is a desire to reach out to people through all forms of communication. They have an impetus to seek out perfection, but their ideal cannot be reached in the real world, and this can cause them to become destructive. They will seek to pound a square peg into a round hole, even if it breaks not only the peg, splits the hole, and breaks the hammer as well. One interesting reflection on this that I've seen is that mad scientist can be seen from this placement. Let's hope that that doesn't come up again. This placement should be studied in conjunction with the ascendant, which reflects the public persona. One way to read this, or to sum it up very briefly, would be that it reflects a rather androgynous and smug intellectual persona. Rulerships. Ruler of the 10th and the 9th. When the moon is here, one of the most important effects of this placement is the desire to be a parent or a teacher, especially to those from a foreign country. The 10th house, Cancer. Venus and Mars are in conjunction here. The ruler is the moon. His status is neutral. It is receiving the Ketu's first aspect. The nakshatras, Venus and Mars, are both in Ashlesha nakshatra, which is ruled by Mercury. Analysis. House. This is the house of profession. Public esteem and dignity can be seen from here, and one may gauge one's degree of success. This house is also related to authority in higher political posts. Sign. Cancer is in the midheaven in this chart. Much like the ascendant, this is reflecting a prominent attitude found in the chart. Not surprisingly, this is the sign which focuses on feelings. There is also an impetus to focus on family or close connections. There's a desire to parent individuals, and there's an emphasis on a more intuitive nature. Along with the prominent role of Venus, this is another indication of the dominant role of females and female attitudes in the energy of this chart. Cancer as the 10th house means an emotional desire to cater to the physical and psychological needs of the public are primary. There is a tendency to project the concept of home, or what the Germans themselves might call Gemütlichkeit, onto the public sphere. This manifests as a desire to nurture the world. Planets, Venus and Mars. The conjunction. In this conjunction, Venus holds the lower degree and is the dominant force. Given Venus is malefic, this means that the conjunction is not auspicious. It can represent unreliable partnerships or connections as well as imbalanced passions. There is the magnetism of dangerous attraction, which is found here. In women and homosexual males, this may be a placement for those who like bad boys. This can also represent violence towards women. Mars. Mars in the 10th house can create a tireless pursuit of goals. It is a pioneering spirit of thinking outside the box. But negatively aspected and poorly conjunct, he can create a sense of frustration with areas of career and public reputation, as well as separation and distance from the mother figure. In this chart, then, that would be the nation. He can also create breaks in economic areas. Because it is Mars, this may be centered on real estate or heavy industry. This may also imply professional criminals or militant gangs. In the sign, Mars is neutral towards the moon and is placed at a mature but not an old degree in the sign. However, he is poorly conjunct with the malefic Venus, which is akin to being in a bad marriage. Further, he is considered debilitated in this lunar asterism of Ashadha, which is ruled by his enemy, Mercury. The little prince is conjoined with Rahu, and under his influence is manifesting all his negative traits through this NAKSHATRA to both Venus and Mars. This placement will make him more aggressive and argumentative, especially, you could say, even emotionally volatile. So such a Mars is frustrated and he feels that he cannot attain his goals. When Mars is in such a state, he can either lose willpower or he will lose all sense of proportion and will go out and pick fights over anything. He can also generate more accidents, especially to Martian matters such as real estate, industry, or professions under his dominance, such as police, doctors, firefighters, security guards, and soldiers. Venus. Venus in the 10th house, when negatively placed, can create problems with females, especially in areas of career and public reputation. There is unhappiness with how events are unfolding in the public sphere. This could be interpreted that much of this energy was actually expressed through Prime Minister Angela Merkel herself. Being aspected by Ketu means that she was influenced in her decision by past historical events. But all of that may be trying to narrow this down too much. That's a more advanced question, and this is a basic analysis of the chart. As noted, Venus is the ascendant lord of this chart and is poorly placed. While benefic by nature, he will not be able to help the situations represented here. He is not as debilitated as in Virgo, but placed in this sign of his enemy, the moon, who rules Cancer. He is also receiving negative aspects along with Mars from Mercury through the nakshatra of Ashadha. Venus, from the effects of his placement in this lunar mansion, becomes entangled in unhealthy relationships. He is unable to maintain defined boundaries. and there is a drive to push to erase personal boundaries for an ideal of unconditional love. Now that has been reflected through the attraction, through the sexual magnetism of the conjunction, and also something which I neglected to mention about the seventh house, which is the natural house of Venus, and one which is ruled by Mars, is that that seventh house condition can create a problem with boundaries, which could also be translated as borders, like borders of nations, like you can't control them. Aspects. Ketu's first aspect is looking at this house with all his power. Thus, he is bringing into this everything from Pisces, as well as the whole negative influence of past history. Rulerships. Venus, ruler of the 1st and the 10th. Venus in this placement will tend to create an artificial persona to interact with society. Appearance and externalities become the sole focus. Ruler of the 8th and the 10th. Reputations are built on issues of sex, death, and the resources of others. Mars, ruler of the 2nd and the 10th. Through conditioned efforts, Mars may be able to achieve his goals. This also indicates political figures are able to advance in their careers, and they will use this crisis to do so. Ruler of the 7th and the 10th. This is a placement which indicates the impulse to seek out others to act as a guide or a teacher. There is also an emphasis of using business partnerships and connections for gain. The 11th house, Leo. Jupiter and the Sun are conjunct here. The ruler of the house is the Sun, and he is of course placed in his own sign. The Sun is the only well-placed planet really in the chart. Aspects. From Saturn, Rahu's special 12th aspect, reflecting past life evils or historical evils, is also on this house. Jupiter is in Magha Nakshatra, which is where my natal Jupiter is placed, and it is ruled by Ketu. The Sun is in Purva Falguni, which is ruled by Venus, who is of course Malefic. Analysis. House. This is the house of casual income and gains. Luck and wish fulfillment is also seen from this house. It is also related to social connections and community at large. Sign. Leo is the sign of politics. It is the desire to be the center of the universe and focus on command. It's a sign of authority. It's here that one sees willpower. With Leo as the 11th house, there will be powerful activities on the part of political and large corporate networks. This is a placement which shows that they are going to profit from this situation of the crisis. Planets, Jupiter and Sun. The conjunction. Jupiter is holding the lowest degree and exerting dominance over this conjunction. On the positive side, this creates a worldview which always sees the best in every situation, though with Jupiter Combust, because he is less than 10 degrees from the Sun, this may become too unrealistic. The darker side of this conjunction, even though lessened as the Sun is not dominant, is a rigid outlook and a tendency to moralize. Politically, as this is Leo, for those in authority, this placement means that this will bring them luck to some degree to simply get away with it. Although Saturn, trying to bring out some of the scandals, how much they'll get away with in the long run is unclear. Jupiter. Jupiter in his combust state in the 11th house can create an overly optimistic perspective, as has been mentioned in more than one place. He will also seek to overexpand the situation too quickly, which here relates to social circles or community, such as too many people arriving too quickly. This happened under the influence of the combust Jupiter. He can also create a lack of ability to properly manage resources, which may especially be damaging to children, or we may read this to the younger generation. Pardon me. Jupiter is sitting in the lunar mansion or nakshatra of Magha. This placement can express itself in leadership, power, and a loyalty to a spiritual heritage. It can also make one big-hearted to others, although, of course, Jupiter state, he can overexpand that, so you're overly open-hearted. You wear your heart on your sleeve, even though you keep getting your wrist cut. There's often a focus on cultural purity and maintaining links with ancestral knowledge from this. However, it can also create a self-doubt about these matters, resulting in a need to prove oneself to others. So, in other words, if you're the Germans, you really want to prove that you're not a Nazi. That is part of what this placement is showing. Sun. The Sun in Leo represents authority. This is often expressed as the governments or large corporations. It is also reflective of confidence and vitality. He is in the 11th house, which be given the capacity to create results. It also reflects the influence of well-placed and powerful individuals. They will have the resources for their goals, although the nature of them may be indicated or seen from the combust Jupiter. The Sun is sitting in the nakshatra of Purva Falguni. This is ruled by Venus, which is in a malefic state. This can give good leadership qualities and a government position. However, with the negative influence of Venus, this can generate vanity, overconfidence, and something of a personality of a showman. This is also indicative of government fraud. Rulerships. Jupiter, ruler of the 3rd and the 11th. There is a need to associate it with like-minded people who are working towards a common aim. Now, because of the placement, this partially indicates also what is happening within the governments. There is a great deal of writing and communication towards this end. Ruler of the 6th and the 11th. And this one is important. This indicates that there will be, or there is an orientation towards benefiting from an enemy. However, this will be more than likely a Pyrrhic victory, as the results will be loss of health and status. The status of Jupiter will make them overconfident in their victory and luck. So this is why I'm not sure exactly how much they're going to get away with in the long run. Sun. This is a place ruler of the 11th and the 11th. This is a placement which focuses on a drive to build networks and audiences. This is often done through championing various causes, and in a negative inflection of this impulse, this can be imposing them on others against their will. with the sun as the government and large corporations in the sign of politics, they are seeking new constituents. This is their new audience. The old friends ain't doing it for them, so they need a new group of friends who will be more compliant with their ideals. Purva Paapa. Historical evils. This 12th aspect of Rahu is understood to reflect failures of the past, which are playing a direct role in the unfolding of the events of the present. In individuals, this is interpreted as past life karma. Now, I don't think that this is applicable as such in this chart, and I would tend to read this in terms of more historical influences to the background of this event. This means that Leo and all 11th house matters, that there's a parallel interpretation which is exerting influence on them at the past. This means that past government and combust ideologies are the roots in many ways of the current issues. Jupiter's connection with Magha Nakshatra, which deals with ancestral matters, reinforces this placement. Twelfth house, Virgo. So here we have Rahu and Mercury in conjunction. The ruler of this house is Mercury, who is exalted in Virgo, but is negatively conjunct. Rahu is in Uttara Falguni, which is ruled by the sun and is actually well placed, while Mercury is in Asta Nakshatra, which is ruled by the moon, who is neutrally placed. Analysis. House. This is the house of what is hidden. It is the house of loss, separation, segregation, and expenses. Deception, secret enemies, and hidden sins are also indicated by this house. Also on this list are insults, disgrace, and sorrow. Another association is with foreign peoples and places. Sign. There is an emphasis in this sign on perfection through purifying. There is also a tendency towards analysis and being methodical and hard work. Virgo also represents a desire to serve and heal. On the other side of this sign, cunning can be seen from this sign. As the final house, this represents as the 12th house, I should say, as the final house, it should be pointed out, also represents the completion of a cycle. So that sense of a completion of cycles are associated with both the north and south node of the moon. Now, the natives with Virgo in the 12th house can be very focused and governed by their inner convictions above all else, and their own obsession or pursuit with sort of renewal. Planets, Rahu and Mercury. The conjunction. Rahu holds the lowest degree and is dominating this conjunction. Thus, his malefic influence will permeate all matters under its sway. The conjunction may create unusual or toxic thinking. Logic may be clouded by anxieties from phantom issues. In an individual with Rahu with this placement, there could be things like obsessive compulsive disorder, for example, although obviously that doesn't necessarily apply in the same way in this chart. The obsession and the mentality may be drawn to foreigners and foreign matters. Criminal tendencies can also be seen from this conjunction, and this is the sort of conjunction which would represent organized crime. Because remember, Mercury is commerce, but we'll get to that in a moment. Rahu. In your sign of Virgo, the shadow planet will focus on pragmatic results. He is in harmony with many of the traits of this sign, such as analysis, cunning, and problem solving. However, he will place these at the service of his nature as a magician to create illusion and spread the smoke of deception. This will be going also through all his aspects, and so he's casting illusion through all of them. One tactic of Rahu here is to create intellectual knots which seem to be hopelessly tangled, and because he's with Mercury, those can be legal issues. So they could say, well, we can't do anything because of this, that, or the other thing, and it's all a bunch of bureaucratic red tape. This is a manifestation of Rahu there. Rahu in the 12th house is bringing the influence of foreign lands and unusual people. There may be an obsession with people who are different from the native culture. Rahu is the natural indicator of such things himself. In other words, that which is alien and different. And feeding on the energy of an exalted Mercury, as well as being in the 12th house, he will heighten the presence of foreigners. These influences will cause losses, and they will bring about separation. This also means that there are unscrupulous practices involved, and that there are a number of hidden factors to events. And because of the 12th aspect, that may be connected, which is on Leo, that may be connected with governments or large companies. Rahu here also represents the ending of a cycle. This may be related to Ketu, which in Pisces represents faith, ideals, and religion. Another aspect of Rahu in the 12th house is that he may be a criminal or one who is running a prison or segregated areas like ghettos, which could be read in this concept as, say, some of the no-go areas in Europe. Because he is conjunct with Mercury, his unscrupulous practices may be connected with business or the law, or, as I mentioned, organized crime explicitly in some form. They will gain from their connection with the foreigners. Mercury can also represent youth. This placement and conjunction could also imply the exploitation of youth, or those, especially those who are on the margins of society. The north node of the moon, Rahu, is sitting in the lunar asterism of Uttara Phalguni. There can be an emphasis here on concentrating on an inner strength or focus to connect to historical roots through a desire to serve others. But again, with Rahu, that can be inflected or turned to a more negative way. This is why this is called the star of patronage, which is driving the struggle for a righteous cause. Although, because it's Rahu, that cause can be an illusion. Rahu can also bring a toxicity to this ideal cause. Mercury. Mercury under the influence of Rahu will be malefic. The reason for that is Mercury, being mercurial, will act like whomever he's with. In the 12th house, this Mercury here can indicate being deceived by false religious figures or by being gullible in general. This is a placement for those who are victimized and martyred. This is it reflects a poor focus and lack of confidence. The planet Mercury in the lunar asterism of Ashadha. This can make Mercury here an expert in communication and possessed of good analytical power. However, under the shadow side of Rahu, this can, bring out the darker side of this influence. Through Mercury, this could make him a crafty trickster and taking pleasure in fraud. Aspects. Ruler of the 9th and the 12th, which is only Mercury has aspects here. Rahu Rahu does not. This placement can bring an interest in exploring foreign cultures. Here the native may adapt a belief system that is different in an effort to escape emotional issues or from reality itself. And remember, Saturn is going to bring out just these painful emotional issues. So there are going to be a lot of people who are going to want to adapt to change their belief systems. I'll leave that to further discussion or interpretation. Because this is Mercury, this may be more an intellectual than an emotional or devotional shift. For example, say Venus would reflect a path of devotion. For Mercury, this means that this is a calculation. It's not something that's felt. There's also a potential that the individual beliefs may cause institutionalization or hospitalization. So some of these beliefs that individuals may shift to may cause them to be separated from society somehow. And one of the things which is represented by the 12th house is jails. Again, this may lead to a longer discussion beyond the scope of this video. So there's a danger here of being overly expansive and zoning out. Under the influence of Mercury, especially Malefic with the expansive Rahu, this may take an approach which is overly intellectual, much like the character of Candide in French literature, who lived in abstractions rather than reality. Another example from French literature, which is always very great for this specific trait, since it is very French anyway. I think, what was that? I forget who the author was, but there was a novel, Monsieur Testé. So this is a world of rationalizations which avoid facts. Ruler of the 12th and the 12th. This is a placement which is again dominated by the theme of escape. The secondary influence here would be that of isolation. Interestingly, in an individual's chart, this would indicate the activity of ghosts or spirits. And I have to wonder or speculate if this is bringing in an influence of jinn, which are, of course, as the 12th house, foreign, coming from some other place. But that would be a really esoteric and separate discussion than this. This may also be interpreted as an eruption from the subconscious. This could be indicative of an overly expanded consciousness or one which is out of touch with reality. Now, mimicking Rahu, Mercury may be acting in accord with what Freud called the death impulse, in an eruption from the unconscious. In this chart, this may represent the emergence of this impulse socially from neglected quarters of society. Being Mercury, this could be the youth. However, with Rahu here, it may also be foreigners or young foreigners. Whichever, or possibly both, as this is arising in the 12th, they will be individuals who are somehow segregated. So this concludes this basic study of this chart. I have written more interpretive summary and gone into some of this in more detail, and I am debating whether or not I should publish this as a small Kindle book. If I do that, what I will also do, besides those additional sections which I mentioned, I will also include a section on a very basic and sort of even shallow analysis of the news and how some of these things may have been reflected by that. But of course, going into that in detail would involve transits and a whole separate discussion. So it's just something simple. But thank you very much, and I hope that this presentation was informative and that it will also give those who watch it pause for reflection.